I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Photographers meet here to connect, inspire, and create. And you'll find a schedule and a link to subscribe to our monthly newsletter on my website at lindanickell.com. Every week, a guest shares their photographs, stories, and a few tips to inspire us to look at a subject just a little differently. Tonight's guest is Kelley Luikey. Kelley is a nature and wildlife photographer based in South Carolina. Her work is consistently recognized in national and international photography contests and has appeared in print in numerous publications, including National Audubon Society's magazine. Kelley's artistic and creative approach to bird photography makes her work exceptional and distinctive, with a subtle vibrancy that breathes life into every image, making her portfolio truly special. Kelley offers a mentorship program and in the field workshops. You can connect with her through her website, kelleyluikey.com. And if you're on Instagram, please give her a follow at Nature Muse Imagery. In tonight's presentation, Beyond the Bird, Kelley will share her unique approach to bird photography, covering her shooting techniques as well as the editing process that brings her images to life. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Kelley.
Thank you so much, Linda. And thank you for all the people that have showed up tonight. Such a surprise to see so many names that I know from Instagram and in person. I have a 35 slide program here, so I'm going to jump right into it. And like Linda said, if you have any questions, feel free to type them. And you can also email me, and I'm happy to email back and forth and get your questions answered that way as well. All right, so a little bit about me. I actually only do birds now, so I am self-taught in digital photography and editing. I did take photography classes in college, but those were film photography and working in the darkroom. And then I kind of dropped the camera, had kids, and kind of forgot about it until I did the Master Naturalist program here in 2013. And that's when I picked up a camera again and started just tinkering around with nature photography, landscape photography. And now I only do birds. So after that was, I guess, 11 years ago, I started really tinkering, and then about 6 years solely birds. When I first started shooting birds, I was actually known for shooting really dark and dramatic scenes. But as I was able to purchase better lenses, camera bodies improved, and I gained more skills, I became more interested in shooting light, dreamy scenes, and this makes up most of my work now. So you can see examples down here below. For those of you that don't know me, this is very much my style of photography. Most of my photography is done locally here on the coast of South Carolina. And I do photograph for gallery. So I'm in a gallery here, so most of my things I'm shooting for print. I also do one-on-one instruction with people, and now I can travel a little more that my kids are older. My daughter is about to go to college this fall, so I hope to be on the road a little bit more after that happens. And then after falling in love with Columbia, I now bring small groups there as well. So that's just a little background about me. And I titled this program Beyond the Bird because creating beautiful bird images is much more than just the bird in the frame. And most of you probably already know that, but I'm just going to kind of go through how I think about photography and how I approach it. Below is my website, which Linda already pointed out, but there it is written for you in case you don't know how to spell my name. All right, so we're going to talk about, first of all, setting yourself up for success with the right equipment and accessories. And then we'll talk about general camera mechanics. And then in the field shooting tips, we're going to spend the most time on, and that's why I have a little star there. And then we'll do some editing basics. I can't really go into too much detail about any of these topics, but we'll spend the most time on in the field shooting tips. Equipment and accessories. So the first thing you need is a camera body. Most of you probably already have your camera bodies if you're here. All the brands make great camera bodies. and your personal choice, goals, and budgets are going to be different for everybody. Everything in photography is cost benefit analysis, and equipment is no different. So you want to think about your budget and look for a camera with a larger sensor size that can handle higher ISOs. Okay, so bird activity and light are the best early in the morning, late in the evening, so it's important to have a body that works well under those lower light conditions. So a full frame is going to be better than a crop sensor for birds. So when I first started out, that's a picture of me on the left here. That is me with my original bird setup, which was the Canon 7D2. Some of you that have been shooting for a long time will remember that crop sensor body, and then the 100-400. And now fast forward, that was probably 2017 when that was taken. Now I've got two mirrorless bodies and prime lenses. So that's kind of my evolution there. So on to lenses. Generally, you're going to want to be shooting in the 200 to 600 range. I'm just going to move us here so I can see. A zoom lens is going to offer more flexibility, and it's going to have different focal lengths in one lens. They're more economical, and they're also lighter weight and gives you more flexibility when you're out. So you can zoom in and out to the different focal lengths, 100-400, 200-500. There's all different combinations. Prime lenses are at a fixed focal length. They cost more and offer a lot less flexibility, but they are better quality glass and offer wider apertures, f2.8, 4.0, etc., that will help you shoot in low light situations and isolate your subjects with a shallower depth of field. All right. So when people come to work with me, a lot of people don't have the budget for, a big 600, 400, 500 prime lens. But I always recommend looking into purchasing a 300 2.8, as they are a lot less expensive than lenses in the 400 millimeter plus range, and they're a great lens to have. In fact, for almost all of my Columbia shots that I've posted from the last two trips, they were almost all from my 300. The next time I go back, I'm not even going to bring my 600. So they're a great lens to have, and they're a great value. Okay, so tripods and ground pods. I am a big believer in tripods. I hear from a lot of people that they don't like to use a tripod, they can't use a tripod, it's hard to use a tripod, but I'm a big believer in tripods and learning how to use a tripod well. A gimbal head for bird photography is also necessary. It's going to be much smoother. You're going to stabilize your camera. And once you get used to using one, it's much easier to frame your subjects, hold your camera steady, and shoot action this way. Okay. Your arm is going to get tired. I don't care how light your lens is. If you're, holding it for an hour and a half, you're going to get tired. So having a tripod is a good thing to have. Doesn't mean you have to stay on it all the time. Oftentimes I'll come off of mine. If I'm shooting on the tripod, but I need to move in a different way or get down lower, I'll just take my camera off and then do that. I shoot a lot at the beach because I live on the coast, so I use a ground pod for shooting at the beach, marsh, or any other water situation, lake, whatever. So that you can see that in the bottom left-hand corner here. Okay. I also recommend for people to get a battery grip. If your camera does not have buttons for the portrait mode built into your camera, I recommend purchasing it. Not necessarily for the battery, although it is nice to have that extra battery in there. But it's going to give you the dual buttons that mimic a camera body that does have that. So here's my R5 that does not have the dual buttons, so that I can switch to vertical here on my R3 seamlessly. If I put a battery grip on my R5, I can mimic what my R3 has. And that just means that I can shoot in portrait mode much easier. My hands are going to have a second set of buttons, and it's just going to be so much faster. Okay. I shoot a lot in portrait mode, and a lot of people will say, well, I'll just shoot in horizontal and then just crop it to a vertical. And that works sometimes, but sometimes if you have a really beautiful sky and you want to get all those beautiful clouds in there, that horizontal is just not going to be enough reach to do that. So you might need to switch to vertical. Or if a bird comes in really close to you, a wading bird, and you're going to cut it off, you need to switch to vertical. So being able to have your hands work the buttons on that on the camera in that way is going to be much easier. All right, so here I've got just a list of some equipment and accessories that I like to use. I'll go through them really quickly. Skimmer pod, I already talked about. That's the ground pod. That's the brand that I use. I have it matched with a Wimberley gimbal head. That's what I also use on my tripod. Tragopan makes some great photo blinds. Great resource for pop-up photo blinds and other camouflage equipment you might need when you're out in the field. Prois Hunting makes camouflage clothing for women, and I am 6 feet tall, and they make talls, so I am all about that as well. Think Tank and Rugged make rain covers are great to have in your bag for rain. I also use, you can see me here, I wrap my camera in a disposable one when I'm out shooting. I don't dispose of it. I keep rinsing it off and rinsing it off and reusing it. But I have several of these in my bag, in my car. I have them stashed everywhere. And this just helps further protect my camera and my lens from sand and salt water. For shooting at the beach, also NRS makes some great clothing, Hydroskin pants, I highly recommend, and their shoes, their work boots for shooting at the beach. Anybody who comes to work with me here, the most important thing that I say over and over again is important to wear shoes that strap tightly on your feet when exploring beaches and marshes where you could become stuck. The last thing you want to do is have to reach down and pull your shoe out of the mud and the muck when you've got your camera in your hand and all of the stuff, and you're just going to end up a mess and get it into your camera. So you want your shoes to strap tightly on your feet. In the summertime, I just wear Chacos, but when it's cooler out, I wear the NRS work boots, which are great. Steel makes great board pants, which is what I have on here, and tops that are great for hot weather shooting at the shore. I don't know what other people wear board pants for, but they work really great for bird photography at the beach. Cotton Carrier makes great carrying systems I like to use when I'm hiking. I usually, if I'm looking for owls, I will carry my binoculars with me and my smaller lens and just go for a walk, and that's how I'll spot owls. Snake boots, super important here. Also, for those of you in Texas, a lot of you from this group are from Texas. This summer, I was out shooting and a woman was wearing flip-flops, out in the sunflower fields. And it just made me cringe because it's very hard to focus on birds, which are generally high up, in the trees or the flowers, and also look down for snakes. So it's good to have a good pair of snake boots. And finally, invest in a sturdy tripod. They're pricey, but worth it. My personal tripod is made by Pro Media Gear. And I tell this story to everyone that shows up to work with me that has a not sturdy tripod, which is a lot of people. It's not the most fun purchase. And when I bought my 600, it was a huge investment for me. I was so excited to get out and use it. And the last thing I want to do is spend another $1,000 on a tripod. So I took out the little tripod that I'd been using with my 100-400, which technically fit the weight of my 600, and took it out to a place called Byler Forest, stuck it on the boardwalk, walked away to go look for a fawn, and I watched the whole thing just go over the boardwalk and down into the swamp. And I had to shimmy my way through the boardwalk railing, get down in the swamp, bring it all back up. Luckily, everything was okay, but it was super scary. So invest in a good tripod. Super important. Oh, and my page is not. There we go. Ah, sorry. Okay, so now we're going to go to general camera mechanics. So learn about your camera and how to use it, but don't get too fixated on all the technical aspects, especially if you're just starting out. You want to master the basic things. All of these new cameras have a ton of different controls, and you can get overwhelmed really quickly. So these are the basic things that I would say you need to know, and we'll go over a few more besides just this list here. You do want to learn how to shoot in manual. This is going to give you the most creative control in your camera. Shoot in RAW rather than JPEG. This is going to give you the most options when you go to edit. Test your camera in different light situations so you know how high you're willing to crank your ISO, which we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. I try to keep mine no higher than 6,400-ish, but have gone as high as 10,000 with good results. It just depends, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute because it's important. Learn to use back button focus for bird photography, and this is going to be disconnecting your autofocus from your shutter button. and assigning, you can see here this AF on button will then become your focus button, or your focus button. And then focus points, I usually shoot with animal eye, single point, or single point expanded focus. If you're using back button focus on a mirrorless body, you can program different buttons for the different focus points that you want to use. So for example, on mine, I have this one here as my animal eye, and this one is single point. And I think this is single point expanded. I think I programmed it, but it's harder for my hand to reach that. So I usually use these two. The other thing about using back button focus is that you are able to just reach out and manually focus your lens instead of having to push different buttons to do so. So oftentimes if I'm shooting through foliage, I'm just going to reach out my hand and I can manually focus. So this shot up here, I was shooting between a narrow window of foliage and my camera couldn't focus it. It was just going back and forth, so I could just reach out and focus it that way. For autofocus modes, I'm usually shooting in servo, which is continuous if you're Nikon. It's just going to continuously be focusing, and then I'll switch to one shot if I had a subject that is still and I want to lock my focus on that subject. All right, so the most important thing is to master the relationship between aperture ISO and shutter speed, which is called the exposure triangle. So there's lots of tutorials online that you can do, read about this, but you really need to understand how your camera works and how to manipulate it so that you can tell it to do what you want it to do. Okay, so it's always going to be a cost-benefit analysis. But basically, to add more light, you have three options: increase your ISO, decrease your shutter speed, or open up your aperture, which just makes the number smaller. So these two shots that I picked out below were actually from the same day. One was in the morning, one was in the evening. So when I go out in the morning, I usually arrive 30 minutes before sunrise. And I'm going to dial in a high ISO because it's going to be pretty dark and I'm trying to get a lot of light into my camera. So I'm then going to start gradually bringing it down as I try to get my shutter speed higher and higher to accommodate action. Okay, so very commonly I'm starting out at 6,400, maybe as high as 8,000. And then I'm going to start bringing that down as the light changes. And the light changes usually about every 5 minutes, I would say, or if clouds are rolling in and out. In the evening, so this shot was taken in the evening, I might go out an hour and a half before. I might just fool around with doing some bokeh and the waves and stuff. And then when I get serious about the light, I'm going to have to start bringing my ISO up higher and higher and higher until the evening is done. So this was the last shot I took on this evening, and it ended up at ISO 8,000. My aperture was 6.3, shutter speed 1,000, which of course you would want a little bit higher when you're shooting action, but this is what I could pull off at that time, and my lens was my 600 4.0. Okay, so that's kind of how you think about those things in the morning and the evening.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay, Jamie wants to know, on your morning shutter speed, you're way below your lens millimeter. Her question is, won't that cause problems?
Yes and no. So yes, there are rules that are out there for all of these various things, but I am frequently shooting, and anybody who has in this crowd that has come to work with me, when we start out, we are starting at very low shutter speeds because we don't really have the choice. And shots like this, if you can hold your camera steady, which you're on the ground on a ground pod, you can often pull them off below those numbers. Okay, so I'm frequently shooting at those. So yeah, 1/160th, it's not ideal. And the reason I was at f5 instead of f4, which I could have been, is that that bird was really close to me. So I was trying to get a little more depth of field in there to accommodate that. So it's always a cost benefit. So you're always going to be in your head calculating what can you do. So good question.
Let me scoot another one in.
Yeah.
Mika wants to know, do you ever use auto ISO with a max limit?
I personally do not. Okay. So, and the reason that I don't is that I would argue that I would rather Um, Here's the example that I always use. If I'm shooting a great blue heron, let's say, that is crossing over this pathway, bringing a stick, okay, to a tree, and he's going through all different kinds of light. Instead of me trying to track him from that whole time and get shots, I am going to track him with my camera, but I'm going to fixate on the place where the light is the best, and that's where I'm going to want to focus my attention. So I don't use auto ISO. I always dial it in. There's been one or two times when I wish that I had had it on, but that's really it. And that was when I was hiking and going in and out of a forest, and I just forgot to change my settings. So I don't use it. If it works for you, I say that's great, but I personally don't.
Okay. All right. There's more questions piling in, but I'm gonna let you kind of continue so we don't run.
Okay.
I'll put them at
Okay.
review at the end.
That sounds good. And I can also answer any extra ones via email.
Perfect. Thank
All
you.
right, so this is the most important thing for me. So anybody that comes to work with me, this is what we work on a lot, a lot, a lot. So learn to use your camera's luminance histogram. Okay, so your luminance histogram is a bar graph that shows you the tonal values in your image. Okay, so you can pull this up in your camera. There's also an RGB histogram. That's another thing. So this is my Lightroom down here that which does show that, but this in your camera, you would just be seeing this. All right, so your blacks are all the way to the left and your whites are all the way to the right. And so when I'm shooting, I'm employing ETTR, shooting to the right, exposing to the right, whatever you want to call it, which means that I'm exposing my scene as far to the right as I can on my histogram without it climbing up. If this histogram starts climbing up, it means that you're blowing things out. Now, there are times when you might want to blow things out intentionally, like the sky or the water if it's an overcast day and you want to shoot a high key scene. But in general, you don't want anything climbing up because that means you've blown out some highlights and you're not going to be able to recover them, more than likely. Okay, so it's really important to really fill out this last, I think it's divided into fifths. This last section right here really needs to be filled out, but not climbing up. So in my camera, there's two sizes you can have your histogram displayed on in your camera in a Canon camera, and I have it on the big, huge size. So I can really see my histogram because sometimes they can sneak up there and you might not notice it. Um, so if you're just learning to do this, one of the things you can do is push it, push it, push it until you see that it's climbing and then stop it back just a little bit. Bring your exposure back a little bit. And then you'll be sure that you are shooting correctly. Okay. And the reason that you want to do this is that you're going to bring more light into the scene in your camera. You're going to have a larger file size because more light equals more information equals a larger file size. And you're going to have little noise when you go back to edit. So people are always surprised at how little noise my images have. And it's because I shoot to the right and I really push it. I really, really push it. All right, you can also turn on your camera's highlight indicator. Those of you that are Sony, you've got the zebras you can also use. You can use that to cross-reference along with your histogram. And then you're going to ensure that you don't blow out highlights, but that you're pushing things as far to the right as you can. Your images are going to look washed out, but you're going to bring the colors back in your editing process. So here you can see this shot here was actually on the same day as those other two images. And here's the original raw image, completely raw image, and this is the histogram for it. And this is a very typical histogram for me when I'm shooting. Okay. So super important. Okay, so now we're going to switch to in the field. And when we're shooting in the field, we want to do the best we can with our images. We want to get the best light, the best exposure, the best composition that we can, and then we can fine tune things with our editing tools when we get back home. So light is the most important. That is going to dictate the mood of your image. And everything about it. Okay, so you've got to have good light or interesting light to make your images really shine. So birds are most active early in the morning and late in the evening, which is also when the light is best for shooting. So that's a win. Sunny days are going to give you beautiful light, but it's going to be over quickly. So if I'm shooting on a sunny day, like I said, I might arrive 30 minutes before sunrise, and I'm going to be done an hour after sunrise. I'm not going to stick around for 2, 3, 4 hours. I'm going to be out of there. If a cloudy day, it's going to allow for extended shooting. So you've got soft, even light, you can keep shooting. So a general rule is if you can look in the direction of the sun without squinting or needing sunglasses, you can probably keep shooting. And then if you have rain and snow, you can shoot about just about any time of day. So here in Colombia, this was probably at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when we had rain. This was in Iceland and it was snowing. It was probably the same thing around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But these others were, this is early, no, this is late in the evening, early morning, and then early in the morning here as well. And most of you probably already know that, but it is important. Um, Photograph birds at their eye level. So when I'm shooting birds on the ground, like I said before, I use a ground pod. Try to keep my camera out of the sand, mud, and water. I will sometimes come off of that ground pod if I want to get a little lower. So that's why I keep my camera wrapped in plastic. I can pull it over and then put my camera down and rest it on my arm. And then I'll put it back on the ground pod when I'm ready to be back up a little higher. I do also keep paintbrushes, big paintbrushes in my car. So when I'm done, I can brush all the sand that I do inevitably get in my camera off of the camera. Um, and then I keep towels in my car. So sometimes if I'm in a spot where I don't necessarily need a ground pod or I don't have it with me, I can just roll up the towel and prop my camera on it. So when I was shooting these swans the other morning, I didn't have my ground pod. I just had a towel in the car and I rolled it up and just put my camera on that. So I try to keep some stuff in my car so that I'm ready. Okay. If you can't get on the bird's eye levels, you got birds in trees or high up, you can manipulate the optics to make it look like you are at their level. Okay, so birds up high, you can make an image look like you are shooting at their eye level by backing yourself up rather than shooting straight up in the air. So for this owl here on the left, I was in Florida here, and there was a whole group of people photographing this owl as she flew in, and they're all standing there with their cameras like this. And I literally, as soon as I saw where she landed, just kept backing up, and I was across the street shooting across so that I was looking at an even plane, and had a nice eye level perspective instead of up like this. Same thing here with this little hummingbird in Colombia. It was hanging on a vine way up high, and we were far enough back so that it made it look like we were at eye level. And the owl on the right, same thing. I was up on an embankment shooting. Just kept backing myself up, backing myself up until it got to where I wanted that nice even plane. So also when I'm out, I call it shot for backgrounds. So I'm always looking for the best backgrounds when I'm shooting. So you need space between your subject and the background to isolate your subject well. So when I have cedar waxwings, which are birds that come in and eat berries, and there'll be like 50, 100 of them in a tree, instead of me trying to take my camera and frantically shoot this one, this one, this one, this one, I'm going to pick the 3, 4 places in the tree that are best for me to be shooting. And I'm just going to wait for the birds to go to those places. And that's when I'm going to click the shutter. Okay. You drive yourself crazy shooting all over the place. You're going to end up with a ton of pictures that you're going to delete anyway. And you want to have nice backgrounds. So choose the branches that have the nice backgrounds and just focus on your shooting there. Same with hummingbirds in my garden. This little hummingbird was in my garden. You know, this garden was packed with flowers, but I found a few flowers where they were isolated and I had nice backgrounds. These were sunflowers in the background, and I just waited for the hummingbird to come there instead of trying to chase it all over the place. So that can help with your backgrounds. Use foreground creatively to diffuse branches or other objects and create depth and interest in your images. So I brought this one up earlier. I was shooting through a narrow window of foliage just to make this scene more interesting. And here as well, this was during an instruction session, and I don't remember. I think we were off our tripods and like contorting ourselves, trying to get these cedar branches in front right here to kind of diffuse this branch and just give it a nicer, more interesting feel. So that can be really fun to play with. All right, so this is probably what I'm asked the most about is these colors in my images. So this is my favorite light, and we do see it a lot here in the wintertime, especially when the air is clear. It's called the belt of Venus. So if you're not familiar with it, you can Google that. But basically, on a clear night or morning, you can look for the the pinks and the blues that you're going to see in the sky, and it's going to be the opposite direction of sunrise or sunset. So if it's at sunrise, it's going to be in the west. If it's sunset, it's going to be in the east. And typically, it's going to be stronger in the evening. But you'll see it anywhere, but if you're shooting by the water, it will just flood the entire scene. So it's super beautiful. I get really excited when I see it. And winter is a really good time. The air is clear. We don't have as many clouds as we do in the summertime here in the South. So it can be really great to get out there and see that. In fact, my daughter was out at the beach yesterday with her friends, and she came back and she goes, "You would have loved it. It was the Belt of Venus, and it was so pretty." So she knows that I love it, and I do really love it. Silhouettes can be fun to play with, not as much my style, but sometimes I will play with it. So as the sun is rising or setting, or prior to sunrise or after sunset, you can look for compelling silhouettes. Practice adjusting your settings to get the right exposure. You're going to have to probably underexpose your subject quite a bit because you don't want to be blowing out the sun. So on the one on the left, you can see that I have an ISO 200, and that was a foggy day. You can see how high the sun was. So the sun was just coming out of that fog, pretty later in the morning. So pretty low ISO here. Um, this one isn't my ideal kind of sun. I prefer it like this when there's a haze in the sky, but I like this shot because the bird was moving and it was still kind of fun. I don't prefer it when it's this white blob, but still a fun shot, I think. But definitely when you've got some cloud cover on the horizon, when the sun is just coming up, some haze, it can make for some really neat effects there with bokeh with the sun. And then backlight. Backlight is fun to play with. So you can get the little bokeh balls in your images. When I'm working with people on the beach, we usually shoot that nice even light that I like with the sun behind our back. And then when we're done with that, we will turn towards the sun and start working on bokeh. So usually when you're doing that, if I was shooting at like an ISO of, I don't know, 1600, I'm going to know that when I turn towards the sun, I'm going to have to bring it down. So usually to 100 or 200 if you're shooting on a bright day. And these are just the sparkles in the water that you can get. And it's really fun to play with. Here I'm shooting the bokeh that's between the trees. This is at my house. So the light that's coming through the trees. And this is also sparkle from the water. And then this image here is backlight with bugs. So all these little white dots are bugs. So that can be really fun and add interest to your image. And always pay attention to what is going on all around you. Take a look over your shoulders and behind you every once in a while to see what you might be missing, because you might be thinking that you are just nailing it, but something amazing is going off behind you to the left or to the right. And all of these images, I was facing a completely different direction when these things happened, and I quickly switched and realized that something much better was happening in a different direction. So always be aware of what's going on around you. In fact, this moon actually was my daughter who signaled to me that the moon was coming up by the puffin. So, yeah, I probably would have missed that had it not been for her. And then when you're in the field, move yourself around to find the best frame. Never, never, never assume you are in the best spot. Rather, assume there is a better frame out there if you move yourself. Okay, so if you have a subject that's stationary, try different angles and light directions until you find what is right. If you're working with owls, just keep your distance. Walk slowly and move slowly. But sometimes the smallest amount of shifting can make a huge difference in your shot. Okay, so this little screech owl here, I was actually in my car and I was rolling back and forth and back and forth, up and down with my camera until I could get this foliage blur to frame this owl. Just made for a much more interesting frame than just the owl in the tree. This one we're going to talk about in just a second. This owl too, I walked completely around this tree trying to find the moss and the frame that framed him best. So I just kept walking until I decided that this was the best place for me to be. So this is quickly just what this owl shot here. So this was on a night my husband and I were sitting outside. We had just opened our beers and we heard the owls calling, and I said we should probably go look for the owls. So I grabbed my binoculars. We went for a walk. Couldn't find the owls. Couldn't find the owls. He finally left. I'm still standing there trying to find the owls, and all of a sudden I found the owls, and I was like, "Oh my God, look at that yellow." And I don't have my camera. So I had to run all the way back to my house, run upstairs, get my camera, put the batteries in. I'd been shooting that morning. They were on the charger, all the stuff. Go back downstairs, realize my tripod was in the car, get the car keys, get the tripod, run back, try to find the owl. So when I first resighted the owl, I was happy that he was still there. I took a test shot and realized that I was not in the place where I'd seen him. So I had to move a little bit more. So I moved myself to this place here, a little further back, a little further down an embankment. And I thought that I was nailing it until I zoomed in on my camera and I realized that there was a piece of moss in the way and the owl was not sharp. So I shifted myself just the tiniest bit. And that allowed for that moss to kind of diffuse the branch a little bit and make my owl clear. So little tiny adjustments can make a huge difference in your shot. Okay, so always be thinking, what can I do better? What can I do better? How can I make this better? Um, and don't go with your binoculars and not your camera to go look for owls. It's a bad idea. Um, so also in the field, small in frame, close-ups are nice, but don't be afraid to zoom out or shoot subjects from afar. Showing more of that environment can make for some really great shots. This little indigo bunting was from this summer. I could hear him, I could hear him, and I could hear him, but I could not see him with my eyes. He was so far back. So I didn't have my binoculars with me, but I did take my camera and kind of just kept scanning until I found him. Um, and oftentimes birds like this will keep singing on the same perch. They'll leave and then come back. So that's what was happening. So he kept coming back to this spot for probably 10 or 15 minutes, which allowed me time to figure out where and how I wanted to frame him. So rather than just taking the shot as soon as I found him, I took the time to move my camera up, down, left, right until I figured out a frame that was really pleasing. So you really want to shoot with intention and think about all these elements in your shot when you're out there. Use cover for skittish birds when needed. A lot of times I will just use a hunter's camouflage blanket net thing that I keep in my car, and I can throw it over me if I'm doing swans or something else that is skittish. This little blue heron in the marsh. I also do have a pop-up photo blind. I use this more in my yard when I'm shooting in my yard. I used to take it with me places, but I don't do it as often anymore. But it's still nice to have in my yard. And then, of course, action and behavior shots are super fun. And the more you're out, the more you know your birds, the more you know when to hit the shutter. I know that black-bellied plovers are really good at finding worms. So when I see them pause a little bit, when their little feet stop and their head goes down, I get ready to hit on that shutter because I know that they might be pulling out a worm. When birds are preening, I'm going to lay on the shutter because you never know when they're going to make a really cute expression. So the more you watch the birds, the more you know their behavior, and the more you're going to be able to nail those shots. Okay, so editing basics. So I love to edit. To me, this is where you bring out the magic, and you work so hard to get your images, and so now is the time to really show them off with the editing. You can do so much in Lightroom that I highly recommend learning and experimenting with all the various tools, and they're always changing. When I first started out, most of these things did not exist. You really only use Lightroom to store your photos. You might have done a little bit with exposure, but now there are so many tools. So I more or less go down the panel, and I'll kind of walk you through some of that on the next few slides. I do also use some third-party software. So I use On1 Photo Effects. I only use the targeted brushes. I don't use any overall adjustments, so I'm just using brushes here. And then I do use their noise reduction, and then I use Nick for some things. So that's what I use, but you can get pretty close to what I do just in Lightroom. Okay, and one thing about editing, I usually edit my my photos as if they were going to be entered in a photo contest. So I'm not taking out branches or moving things around, swapping backgrounds, all of those things. There's a lot of things that you can do. And when I first started out, I did more of those things, and now I do less. So I'm very, very rarely, 99% of the time, 98% of the time, not taking anything out. So the images are as they are. Okay, so that being said, you still want to edit. So if you look up here, this image was in the Audubon Top 100 a couple of years ago. You can see that I was very crooked. This is the original file here. So you want to take care in cropping your image. The first thing I do is fix my horizon. If I'm shooting on the beach, this is often the case because there'll be little pockets of holes or whatever, and your ground pod's not going to be even. I would normally try to be more straight than this, but I had been shooting an avocet in a completely different direction when I just turned and saw these spoonbills come in. So I turned really quickly and didn't have a whole lot of time to set myself up. So I definitely needed to fix my horizon and then cropped for composition and or to get undesirable elements. So this is a marble godwit over here off the right. I wouldn't want him there, so I'm going to crop that out, and all of that. Be sure to not awkwardly crop your birds if you've clipped wings or feet. You can sometimes salvage a shot by creatively cropping it or making it a headshot, but try to shoot by giving your subject plenty of space. A lot of people with zoom lenses, especially, really try to zoom in when really they should be further back, and then they end up cropping feet or important elements. So try to give your subjects plenty of space. And then don't randomly crop when you are editing. So try to keep things consistent. And then you can crop the image to suit whatever you're doing. So if you're going to be posting on Instagram, you can crop it for that. If you're going to crop it for a print or whatever, your website, whatever, try to keep things consistent. Okay, the second thing I do is fine tune my white balance if needed, which usually is needed. I don't shoot an auto white balance, by the way. That's a whole nother thing. I do dial in my Kelvin. But anyway, regardless, there's usually small adjustments that you need to do. And there's 3 ways that you can do it. So you may or may not know all the different ways, but you've got the dropper where you can kind of move it to different white or tan areas of your image and see what white balance it suggests. Or you can go through the presets here that can come up, as shot, auto, daylight, cloudy shape, probably not these last ones, and see what it's getting you as a suggestion. Or you can adjust it manually by sliding the temperature and the tint. So what I usually do is if I'm having trouble with one, I will sometimes use the dropper, but often I'll just kind of run through these quickly and then I'll fine tune them after I see the suggestion that I think is best if I'm having trouble with one. But normally if I have a shot, I can see right away what it is that I want to correct. Okay, so that's important. And then next, I'm just going to keep going down that panel. So I adjust my exposure, highlights, shadows, whites and blacks of my overall scene. How you adjust them is going to be depending on the light and how you exposed it. That's my cat, sorry. I might also pop my vibrance and saturation a little bit for the overall scene. And then you can fine tune specific areas with the local adjustments panel. So we'll talk about that really quickly. Um, uh, there we go. Okay, so this is my favorite part of Lightroom, and this is where you can really work on the individual elements of your image. And that is how I approach my editing. So I do those overall adjustments, and then I'm going to work very locally. All right, so it's this little tool here. And you've got linear gradients, radial gradients. You can use the color range tool. There's all these tools, and there are many tutorials out there if you're not familiar with them all for how you can use them. But basically, if I'm shooting, or trying to work on my bird, I'm going to, I can try subject, but it often doesn't catch birds very well. So I will usually do objects. I'll click the objects tool and then I'll brush in my bird really roughly and it'll find it. And then I can work just on the bird. Then I can work just on the flower. Then I can work on the leaves. I can choose color range to pick a color that I want to work on, like the red right here. If I want to work on the tail of the hummingbird, I can click on the color range tool. So you can use all these different tools to even out light, um, make things more detailed, whatever it is that you want to accomplish. So this is kind of what I had done in here. So these are some linear gradients that I had done. I isolated the hummingbird here, and it looked like I probably did color range here, so you can kind of see. So learning to use those tools and isolate, isolate, isolate. All those little small adjustments are going to add up to make your image really stand out. And then at the end, don't be afraid to use the mixer and the point color. To fine tune the hue, luminance, and saturation of the colors that are in your image. So what I usually do is at the end, I usually use the old mixer. This is the newer part, or the, oh, which is which? The point color is the newer one. Okay, I use this one here. So I basically just go down and I look at the colors that are in my image, the orange, yellow, blue in this case, and I just move the sliders, the saturation and the luminance a little bit. Occasionally I'll change the hue just a little bit. You don't want to do too much there. But just fine tuning your colors can make a big difference. Some people prefer to do the point color, which is where you can take the dropper and pick the color and then work on it from there. I usually just do the color mixer. And then as you're making your edits, just take time to frequently compare a before and after of your shot. So I'm always just hitting, I have a max, so I'm hitting the Y key and just making sure as I go along, am I on the right track? And if you're not, Lightroom is non-destructive, so you can just go back to where it is you need to start over at. So hit the Y key, take a peek, and see how your shot is evolving. Oops. And that is it. So I do individual instruction here in South Carolina in the spring and fall for shorebirds and or birds in our rookery. I don't usually post them on social media because they fill up pretty quickly from my newsletter. So if you want to be on my newsletter list, it's right here, kelleyluikeybirds.com. You can find the sign up. And then I also take people to Columbia now. And I do have a Zoom information session January 16th at 7:30 for anybody that might be interested. You can email me. There's my email address. And I can send you the Zoom link. And that's it.
Wonderful. That was amazing. Okay, let me throw three questions at you that I
Okay.
saw in the chat. First of all, let's start with Jamie's question. Do you prefer on one to topaz?
Okay, so I know that most people use Topaz, and I'm sure they do similar things. I have never used it, and the reason I've never used it is that when I started off, I did some astrophotography and I had on one and I've just always stuck with it. So I think all of them basically do the same thing. And if you're using Topaz for noise reduction, just keep using it. I don't think on one is any better. I don't know how they do their editing. Um, in on one, they have a very extensive brush and local adjustments panel, and that's what I work with there. So I'm not sure how to compare the two that way, just because I don't know how theirs works.
Let me ask you to take down your screen.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so that's okay. Sherry's question, do you ever use the exposure compensation?
No, I do not.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm using my histogram. So yeah, I do not.
All right. Andy wants to know lens filter for protection at the beach.
I do not have a filter on my lens. So, you could see, I think in some of those pictures, you can see that sand that kind of gets in on the hood. But those hoods are fairly long and usually I think protect them. I'm really good about brushing things off when I'm done, but inevitably you're going to get sand in there. Yeah, I don't have them on. When I shot landscape, I did. I used to get little filters and I would have them on, just clear filters to protect my lenses, but I don't on my bigger lenses now.
Okay. Michaela's question is, where in the Carolina Low Country can you find the black-bellied plovers?
Well, I think probably throughout our whole coast. So I live here in Port Royal, so we have them here in Beaufort at our beaches, and then Hilton Head. Yeah, that's where I live, and so that's where we have them.
Okay. Okay, if you have any questions, this is last call, so go ahead and put them in there. The one question I think I need to put in front of you is from Bill. Where do you purchase your lenses and camera equipment?
So I purchase everything from B&H or Adorama. But there's a lot of great companies, and I've heard from people that buy from all different smaller companies. I really like B&H. I also sell my equipment back to them when I'm ready to sell things in. I find that they're fair. I've also purchased used equipment from them and had really good luck. So my used 300 came from B&H.
Okay. I'm just scanning really quick. Okay, here we go. Lisa's got one. When you edit in Lightroom, do you edit the original or do you create a virtual copy and edit the virtual copy?
I just edit the original. Yeah.
Okay. And Lightroom's non-destructive, so it's
Yep. Yeah.
okay. There were a lot of questions tonight. Okay. Okay, don't be a slow typist. Okay, there was one question that, and I can answer this. Somebody asked if can they will this be posted? Can we review it again? And I, with Kelly's permission, I'm going to post it to my YouTube channel, which is Linda Nichols Happiness Hour. You'll find that on YouTube. If you come to the class section or the session when you sign in tonight, scroll down. When it's red, when I highlight in red, you click on that and it takes you right to the YouTube um, portion of it. The videos go up on Friday nights at 6 p.m. So that's where that is. Gosh, there's a lot of nice comments, but I wasn't expecting anything less, Kelly. All right. Thank you so much for doing this. And I know you don't know me, but here's the deal. I'm gonna work on you to come back.
Well, thank you so much, Linda. Yeah, and I hope that everybody got something. It's really hard when you're doing these presentations because you've got all different skill levels. I wasn't sure who was going to be showing up. So in the future, if you want to do a more targeted theme, we can definitely do that as well.
I would love that. I don't know about the rest of them, but this is really Linda's selfish hour. So
Oh,
I absolutely enjoyed this. I knew it would be good, but it exceeded my expectations. And I'm actually getting, I've been kind of in a slump of I just don't feel like going out. I don't feel creative. And I think this was that nudge that I needed. I'm really good at giving other people nudges, but you nudged me. And those are big words for me to like give into it. So
well, get some birds, Linda. I know you do all types of photography, but
do. And birds are one of my favorites. It's the most challenging thing that I photograph. They don't cooperate, no matter how much I will them to or use, not so nice words at them. But when I get a great shot, it's just like, wow. And your photos tonight were beautiful. So I've got a that's a little dose of inspiration for myself. So
oh,
thank you.
good. Well,
All
thank you. And
right.
everybody use your histograms, use your histograms, use your histograms. That's what changed my photography more than anything. So when I learned that years ago, that's really what propelled me into all different directions.
So, see a note from Jamie. I partake in the most expensive hobbies, photography and gardening. And so Jamie's question is now that I have my garden, am I seeing more birds? The answer is yes, because I don't just plant one or two flowers, I plant like several hundreds of flowers.
Wow.
It's a little crazy in here. There I need to seek help, but it's okay. So yes, and actually, as it's gotten colder, all the birds are coming in. They are trying to, look for something to eat so they can hunker down because we're going to get a cold spell here. So yes, the birds are coming to me. I just need to step outside and do it. All right, next week, Randy Robbins, a wildlife photographer of the year honoree. He is the first person to win with a photo that was taken with a smartphone. So he will be here next
Oh,
week. I know, it's amazing. He'll be here next week to share his presentation, Capturing the Wild, Mastering Camera Traps and Off-Camera Lighting for Elusive Wildlife. Until next time, go out and create something beautiful, and I hope that we see you again soon.